Mana System, Hello, World. By M.J. Markgrove. Chapter 151, Tournament Part 4. Even before I could see the contestants, I could hear the stomping and chanting of the crowd. It appeared Hagar the champion had made it to the semi-finals. It was also my first chance to see the figure. Out of one side of the arena stepped a comparatively short man. Maybe a head shorter than I was. What he lacked in height he made up for in girth. The man was like a solid slab of muscle. His bulging arms poked through the sides of his breastplate, being the only part of him unarmored. From head to toe, he was festooned in full enchanted plate mail. It was colored a macabre dark red but seemed to glow with power. At least I hoped it was paint and not blood. Going by the dull grey scratches that cut through the paint, I assumed it was mithril. His opponent turned out to be the large man with the massive hammer, and while he didn't get as many cheers as the champion did, he got a fair share. The fight was a clash of monsters as both men charged in and just started swinging. Hagar with his wee-hander and the other man with his hammer. Blood flowed as the men pounded on each other with zeal, neither one seeming like they wanted to block the attacks. I understood why Hagar refused to do so only a short time after the fight began. A rest mist swirled around the man, seeping into his body and causing his already ridiculous muscles to swell even larger. The giant of a man, not to be outdone, used an ability that caused him to grow another foot of height. I couldn't even hear the clashing of the weapons as the crowd was roaring so loud it drowned out everything else. I thought the fight would have gone on this way forever, but the giant's ability ran out and he shrunk back to his normal monstrous size of 7 feet. Hagar didn't even appear winded as he pushed his new advantage, forcing the man slowly back. I finally got a chance to use Identify on Hagar as their battle pushed its way toward me. Hagar Blood Knight / Sanguine Juggernaut 25ths. He wasn't as high of a level as Tatiana, but he had also specialized. And while hers was aimed toward magic, it seemed Hagar had built himself around the ability to take damage and endure. It was obvious the two classes he had picked worked well together. I also shivered involuntarily, remembering the last Juggernaut I fought, Obadiah Kuth. That man had been terrifyingly powerful for his level, although, watching Hagar, I doubt Obadiah would have beaten him. Obadiah had gone for early power by dual classing, meaning his later leveling would have been problematic at best. Hagar kept forcing the other man back until he ran up against an obstacle and stumbled. That was when Hagar made his move. All of the blood that had been floating around Hagar congealed along his blade and gleamed with malicious intent in the lights of the arena. With a bestial yell, Hagar swung the blade that was now 3 times its original length, straight through the other man's weapon without it being slowed in the slightest. Had it not been a duel, the man would have been cut in half, from his shoulder across through his pelvis on the other side. Even the pillar behind the man had been cleaved through. I did note that the more material the blood weapon passed through, the shorter it got, but that hardly mattered as the fight came to a close, with Hagar easily beating his opponent to go to the finals. A squeaky door opened onto a flat roof filled with air conditioners and ventilation units. The group of men quickly made their way across the roof to the abandoned helicopter pad. It had taken a considerable amount of time, effort, and lives to secure this opportunity, and they would not squander it. "Prepare the hot air balloon and be quick about it," their leader hissed. All of the men had abandoned their disguises and now proudly wore their garments. A white tabard decorated with a setting sun. It was a fitting icon for the fall of man and their righteous purpose in this world. As the balloon filled, they could hear the cheers of the crowd in the distance. The semi-finals had begun and they needed to hurry. Goggles on and prepare the crystal. Each member donned special goggles that were specifically built to nullify the effects of the dream crystals. They weren't the only members of the Sons of Autumn in this cesspool of humanity, but if God willed it, they would be the last survivors. The leader ejected a massive 10-foot crystal from his storage ring. The dream crystals were deceptively light and easy to spot by the rainbow emanations they let off. This was why this one has a tarp wrapped around it to keep any sunlight from activating it just yet. The hot air balloon was nearly ready and props had been attached to it to help steer it properly. It was more a dirigible at this point than a balloon, not that the acolytes cared for the difference. They hooked the sturdy chain to the bottom of the balloon and double-checked that everything was in place. The senior acolyte saluted them with a fist over his heart. "Go quickly now and prepare to cull the city." "Yes, senior," they responded in unison, slapping their fists to their chests as one before they turned and headed back to the casino's top floor. The senior acolyte undid the tarp from around the crystal and it immediately began spewing its bewitching light across the roof. A smaller crystal would have been easier to acquire, but they turned to dust after usually a day of constant use by only 10 people. It was a quirk of the crystals, the more people that viewed the light the quicker the crystals faded. Calculations had determined this massive crystal should be able to enrapture 10,000 souls for 12 hours. At 20,000 souls, it would last for only 7 hours. The Sons of Autumn only needed it to last an hour. During that time their members would butcher anyone caught in the effect. It would be a glorious day for their cause. The senior acolyte jumped aboard the basket and cut the ropes that held it to the roof. After severing a few bags of sand, the basket lifted off the ground and began to lift the crystal. He heard some shouting coming from the doorway as some of the casino's hired goons burst out on the roof. The senior acolyte smiled as their faces went slack and they rushed to get close to the light of the crystal. The crystal lifted out of their reach, but they still followed along like lemmings as the balloon soared past the roof. Each man fell off the roof without a peep, only trying to rotate their bodies to continue staring at the light. Their deaths had an unintended advantage as people on the ground looked up with curiosity, only to be sucked into the same fate. The senior acolyte smiled as he steered the balloon toward the Colosseum. I watched as the two finalists faced off from across the arena. I got a distinct impression that the two knew each other. You usually didn't get that sort of look from a woman unless you personally offended her. Tatiana had fewer floating spears of ice this time around. I assumed it had to do with the lack of water, but that didn't seem to hamper her much as I spotted snow falling around her. I realized she was condensing water directly out of the air to power her magic. Hagar wasn't idle though as he stomped forward, cutting large gashes across his arms. The bloodletting seemed to power his attacks as his blood floated around him in a haze, waiting to be called upon. Seeing as how Tatiana wasn't attacking him with her ice spears, it made sense that he would have to use his own blood to power the attacks. As Hagar neared Tatiana, I could see his mist of blood start to freeze and fall to the ground. He used some ability to counteract this as steam rose from his body, keeping the area within a foot of him free of ice. Then his sword clashed with Tatiana's ice shield with a titanic crack. The snow around him was whipped away by the force of the blow, but Tatiana remained where she was as more snow started to pile up. Even from where I watched, I could hear the grunt of annoyance from Hagar as he slammed his sword against the ice barrier again and again. The wall cracked with each blow, but Tatiana filled in the cracks with the falling snow to reinforce it. She tried to capture Hagar the same way she dealt with me, but whatever ability he was using to stave off the cold prevented the ice from forming fast enough to trap him. It did keep him moving though, so he was aware of the danger of being caught. Tatiana didn't use any attacks against Hagar that broke the skin or drew blood. It made sense that she didn't want to empower him any more than he already was, but it was still going to be a struggle to take him down without slicing him apart. But she was patient and her aura only grew as she chilled the area around her, causing more and more snow to fall. Hagar wasn't out yet though. He let out a bestial scream that caused a shockwave to knock away all of the snow around him and actually managed to stagger Tatiana for a moment. I could see the gleam in his eye as he was about to go in for the kill before a horn from above pierced through the roars of the crowd. Everything paused as the collective looked up. I looked up as well, curious as to what caused the sound, only to stare in horror at what was floating over the stadium. A hot air balloon towing a giant dream crystal below it floated lazily over, and nobody was spared from its effect, even me. I could feel the tug on my mind, and through sheer will, I managed to close my eyes long enough to break the line of sight with the crystal. Congratulations, you have broken free of the dream. New title acquired: Awoken. Awoken, you are no longer influenced by the dream. A wise man knows when to dream and when to take action. Wisdom +1. I shook my head as my thoughts were still foggy. It took me a minute to recover from the short exposure to the bewitching light of the crystal. With trepidation, I looked again. I still saw pretty lights, but it no longer held any sway over me. The only other person I saw that was partially unaffected was Tatiana. I say partially because she had reacted quickly enough to encase herself in her ice prison. Everyone else in the arena was tripping over each other to try to get closer to the light. Some had already fallen to the arena floor. Some had not survived that drop. I needed to do something about this threat, but my cell was magically locked to keep former contestants from interfering with the matches. I could see some of the closer contestants beating on their walls, trying to get free and follow the light. They didn't have a hand monocannon though. I activated my hand and aimed it at the closest hinge before I fired. The magic of the weapon smashed into the enchanted door, shaking the entire room, but the hinge held. It was glowing red, but it held. I began recharging the cannon and readied an annihilator sphere. When the cannon was full, I fired it again and threw out the magic of the sphere. There was a loud grinding sound as the magic slammed into the corner where the superheated hinge was. My magic won out though, and the hinge was vaporized along with a small chunk of wall. I had 2 more hinges to go and it was going to cost me almost all my mana to do it. 925 mana and 2 mana potions later I managed to free one side of the door. The balloon had already floated over the stadium and people were climbing up the steps and leaping to their death on the far side trying to keep up. I slammed into the door and it gave way, clattering into the arena. I downed 2 more mana potions and began running. I wasn't the first contestant to break free of my room, although, I did spot Ska still raging against his magically enhanced walls. The deep gouges told me that room would not hold him forever. I needed to deal with this crystal before he broke free and got himself killed. There was one spot in the arena I steered clear from. Hagar was cutting a bloody swath through the crowd and a veritable tidal wave of blood followed in his wake as he mindlessly worked his way toward the floating crystal. His second class level had jumped from 5 all the way to 8 already and if he kept up this pace would hit 10 within a few minutes. I didn't know the man, but I didn't think he would relish leveling like this. I jumped on top of people to speed my ascent through the arena, like some twisted form of crowd surfing. The people could forgive me later if they survived. Finally, I made it to the top of the bleachers and jumped, spreading my wings and activating every speed-boosting ability I possessed. I roared through the air like I was fired from a cannon, dominion and destruction appearing in my hand as I flew toward the surprised man in the balloon. I saw the man start trying to cast a spell and I used Sunder skill on him. That was enough to interrupt his casting and for me to clear the final distance. I brought the lion's head of my staff down hard on his head. The weak barrier he had erected crumbled before the onslaught of my weapon, collapsing his head into his shoulders. The man would have fallen over if my blow hadn't forced his legs through the wicker bottom of the basket. His corpse flopped about while I quickly thought of a way to deal with this crystal. In order to store it in a ring, I first had to cut it free of the balloon. Only the thick steel chain seemed to be welded in place. I knew what I had to do but it was going to be tricky. I slid down the outside of the basket and swung my legs until I had enough momentum to land at the top of the crystal as it dangled 10 feet below. My high agility made the maneuver possible and I grabbed the chain in one hand as I straddled the top of the crystal. In my other hand, I twirled my staff until the dragon head was facing the chain and I imbued it with fire and earth. This would have been faster and easier if I hadn't been forced to use up all of my casts of Annihilation Sphere to escape. I gritted in pain as the heat spread down the chain, but I didn't let go of it. Slowly the links above melted through and the crystal, along with me, fell away. I immediately stored the dangerous crystal and waited until I was nearing the ground to activate my wings for a second time. I flapped them hard, hovering for a second before I touched down. While I was falling I noticed another issue that needed to be dealt with. A group dressed in white and wearing strange goggles was attacking people from the rear of the crowd. With their distinctive emblem, I knew exactly who these assholes were. I had helped exterminate them from Chicago, and now like cockroaches, they had turned up here. I wasn't about to let the Sons of Autumn kill off thousands of civilians for their sick goals. Everyone affected by the crystal was lethargic and out of it. And the zealots of the church were cutting them down from the back without mercy. I pushed my way through the crowd until I came into contact with an acolyte. He tried running me through with a sword but I easily sidestepped the attack and smashed my staff across his head as I kept moving. There was no lack of targets as thousands of the church's members had come out of seemingly nowhere to butcher the civilians. I smashed through acolyte after acolyte but they seemed never-ending. One blow was usually enough to kill or severely disable the lower-leveled goons but there were just so many and more were streaming toward me as I was a threat to their goal. Everyone froze as an anguished cry exploded over the area. I looked up to see Hagar standing at the top of the Colosseum. A tornado of blood was soaking into his body as he leaped from the top to smash into the ground 3 stories below. Dust rolled away from where he landed but I could see him towering above the crowd. He had grown to be 10 feet tall and each swing of his blood-enhanced sword cut acolytes apart like wheat. That wasn't the only good news. I watched Tatiana float over the arena wall with a look that could kill as dozens of ice spears shot away from her vicinity, each one spearing one of the Sons of Autumn. The Sons of Autumn had seriously miscalculated as more and more tournament members poured from the building and tore through their numbers. You would think the idiots would break and try to flee but they were single-minded as they just pushed even harder into the civilians, trying to kill just one more before their pathetic lives were snuffed out. I did my best to protect the people as most were recovering and realizing something was going on. Civilians started to flee but people were getting cut down or trampled by the panicking mob. I spotted Ska as he ruthlessly tore through the enemy ranks to meet up with me. What happened? He growled as his paw raked across another suicidal member of the church. Dream Crystal, and these crazy fuckers killing everyone they can. He hissed angrily, kill them all. Yeah, kill every last fucker wearing those white tabards. He growled in approval as he sprinted forward to tear through more acolytes. I made sure to buff and heal him before he took off. The fighting lasted another 5 minutes before the final member of the church fell to Hagar's brutal sword. I had lost count of how many members I had killed, but it had been significant. Enough so that I hit level 21. The entire area was littered with the dead. I would like to say that the church made up the majority, but that would be a lie. A trail of corpses led all the way to the city, and at least 6,000 civilians had been killed in this nefarious plot. I could see Hagar sitting on a wall with his helmet off and his head in his hands. Tatiana was over there consoling him. A few of the weaker contestants had fallen during the fighting, but most had survived. Almost everyone was at a higher level than any acolyte I had spotted. I hadn't used Sunder skill during the main battle as I couldn't afford the mana cost. Not that I thought any of these low-level idiots would have interesting abilities for me to take. I did check to see what I got from the man in the balloon though. Silver Tongue, influence the weak-willed and weak-minded. If your Cha end level is greater than your target, WIS end level, you have a 50% chance to turn them toward your cause. The chance increases by 10% for every point below your Cha end level they are. Cost 100 mana, cooldown 2 hours. It was times like this that the system made me physically ill. Why did skills like this need to exist, I had to ask myself. Rationally I knew that any skill was possible, but it didn't make me have to like it. I cast it to the Void Lottery along with Resuscitate, as I would never be using that skill either. Brimstone, conjure a wall of hellfire that deals *.3 mod damage to anything it touches. Targets also take 1 permanent charisma damage for every 10 seconds the fire burns them. Lasts 2 minutes. Hellfire can only be extinguished with holy water or holy sources. Cost 90 mana, cooldown 30 minutes. I winced at the skill description. It was certainly good, but extremely dangerous. I would need to be careful with it, and carry a supply of holy water with me to put it out. I also selected my new skill. Seeing as I only got one option for level 21, it wasn't much of a decision. Silence, this word of power creates a wave of silence that ripples out from you. Any spell requiring verbal components cannot be cast within the 10-meter area of effect. Lasts 30 seconds. Cost 10 mana, cooldown 10 minutes. The spell simply stated AoE, meaning it didn't exclude allies. It probably also meant I couldn't cast within the area. The other spell was an automatic boost to rejuvenate, bumping it up to 200 health instead of the 175 of the previous level. That was good as my healing spells were starting to lag behind. Last, I looked at my level. Paul Fuller Mantra Enchanter / Maw of the Void level 21 15ths. Strength, 20, plus 2, modifier x22. Endurance, 20 modifier x40. Agility, 20, plus 2, modifier x22. Perception, 18 modifier x22. Intelligence, 25 modifier x40. Wisdom, 16 modifier x22. Charisma, 11 modifier x22. Luck, 16 modifier x22. HP, 800, 880. Stamina, 400, 440. Stamina Rigon, M880. Mana, 1000. Mana Rigon, M352. It seems I also finally unlocked my second tier of agility. I guess the system thought flying through the air, just shy of supersonic speeds, qualified. I stored my staff and went in search of Ska. Chapter 152, Clean Up. I was helping clean up the mountain of corpses. I knew I didn't have to stick around and do it, but that would be a dick move. I might be an asshole, but I wasn't a complete prick. Dead civilians were lined up and covered with any available fabric. Eventually, survivors would have to go through and see if their loved ones were among the dead. As for the Sons of Autumn dead, they were tossed into a pile in an open pit. A few eager fire mages were making sure that everything burned properly. I couldn't blame them for wanting some way to enact revenge on the people that had attacked them. It was during this cleanup that I spotted 2 people approaching me. One I recognized as Don, but the other well-dressed man I didn't know. Paul, I finally found you. Let me introduce you to my boss, Charles Lamont. It is a pleasure to meet our savior, the man said, holding out his hand. I gripped the man's hand and gave it a shake. The man seemed unconcerned about the blood and dirt that now covered his hand. I couldn't just stand back and let them kill everyone, I replied. And for that, I am ever in your debt. Not being in control of your body is a disconcerting experience and one I never wish to go through again. I am curious as to how you broke free, but I will set that curiosity aside, and instead, I would like to offer you a reward. How would you like to come work for me personally? No offense, Mr. Lamont, but I don't plan on sticking around long after this cleanup is completed. If you wish to offer me a reward, how about you give me access to the bazaar? Well, it was worth a try. As for the bazaar, that shouldn't be an issue. If you ever change your mind, Mr. Fuller, feel free to seek me out. I could always use more capable people. The man reached into his coat pocket and handed me a black card about the size of a credit card, but made of metal. This will allow you through the wards. Until we meet again, Mr. Fuller. The man turned around and walked away. Don gave me a short nod and hurried after his boss. The cleanup took hours, despite the number of people chipping in to help. I finally got sick of the smell of roasting human flesh and had to walk away. Ska had already returned to the fortress and was likely asleep. Being under the influence of the gem seemed to take a lot out of a person, and most people were finding it difficult to continue moving only a few hours after the fight. I found an aid station for injured people and lent my help to them. It was really more an opportunity to clean the blood off my hands, both literally and figuratively. I didn't regret killing all of the church members, but that didn't mean I reveled in their demise. They were pure evil and had no remorse or compunction against slaughtering anyone and everyone that got in their way or didn't submit to their twisted worldview that mankind needed to be purged from the planet. Healing the injured didn't take all that long. Most that had survived, healed on their own, and the ones that were usually too far gone had succumbed to their wounds before other healers got to them. There were only people still suffering lingering damage like lost limbs or poison attacks that others weren't able to cleanse. I finished up at the aid station and headed back through town. I was exhausted and needed rest. As I was passing a cafe, I heard my name called. Mr. Fuller, a moment of your time please. When I looked, I spotted an unassuming man dressed in a brown smoker's jacket and matching pants. He was waving me over from an outside table with a cup of coffee or tea, steaming away on it. I grunted in annoyance but headed over. He wasn't the first person who wanted to thank me today and probably wouldn't be the last. Look, you don't need to thank me, I was just doing what I thought was right, I stated flatly, wanting to leave as quickly as possible. The man laughed, which I found odd. I chose that opportunity to use inspect on him. The man's information came up blank, no name, no class, no level. Who are you? I asked accusingly. Nobody of importance, please, have a seat so we can have a chat, he asked, gesturing to a chair across from him. I looked around, scanning the area with my eye tattoo, but found nobody hiding. The man only lifted an eyebrow as he sipped his drink. You didn't answer my question, I said. Let's just say we had a mutual acquaintance. I hear she was a real stone in your boot. So you work for her stone? The man chuckled, hardly, if anything I work for humanity, but I doubt you would believe that. Come now, Mr. Fuller, or should I call you, Paul, as you prefer. What I would prefer is if you people would leave me the fuck alone, but it seems that isn't likely to happen now, is it? I stated angrily, taking the seat across from him. Yes, there were a few overzealous members of our organization that thought killing you would solve our problem. And what problem would that be? The man smiled but didn't answer. It has been decided that fighting you is not in our best interests, Paul, despite what you may have seen in the past. I know, hard to believe, but it's true. If you want answers to your questions, you could always join us, but I don't see that happening after what Stone did in Houston. So she was the one that leaked that information. She was, it was a miscalculation on her part that cost her dearly. You won't have to worry about her anymore, the man replied, taking another sip of his drink. I assume he meant she was dead, but with these people who knew. So is that what you came here to tell me, that Stone is dead and I'm safe from your organization? As if I should just take what you say at face value. Hardly, but for now you are not a concern. We are more interested in what occurred with the Dream Crystal and the Sons of Autumn. Your presence here made us miss this scheme. Are you saying it's my fault this happened? I asked angrily. No, but if you hadn't been here we would have learned of it sooner and been able to stop it. But you need not worry about that. I would advise you to keep a low profile, but I don't see that happening either. Your actions tend to be far-reaching, Paul, despite your attempts at trying to remain out of the spotlight. I'm not going to just hide away in a dark corner just to appease your group. And who made you the arbiters of humanity? No, you wouldn't, but even simple acts like your runic magic will eventually bite you in the ass, Don't expect the Enchanters Guild to sit back forever while their profits are worn away. As for your second question, decades upon decades of experience, not to say we were perfect, but we always have the best interest of humanity in mind. Oh, and you can see the future now. No, experience and human nature tell me what will come about. But again, I'm not here to fight you, just here to open your eyes to the bigger picture. Our actions have a purpose despite what you may think. Whether or not you learn from this discussion is up to you. Now, as much pleasure as it's been to finally talk to you, I must be going. There is never any shortage of issues that need to be dealt with. Have a good day, Paul, the man added, standing up and adjusting his suit before he walked away. I quickly lost sight of him among the crowd. I wanted to call bullshit to all his accusations. I knew my actions had consequences, but it seemed like what they did was decide right or wrong for everyone. As for what this man said about me, I wasn't entirely surprised. I had witnessed it myself over the last 10 months. Trouble seemed to find me, despite my best efforts to stay out of it. Some of that could be attributed to wanting to help people or revenge from people I wronged, but other stuff just seemed to come out of nowhere. Take this attack for example. I hadn't seen hide nor hair of the church since I left Chicago. Yet here, at the one time I visited Vegas, they decided to attack. The statistical possibility of that happening was slim unless they had come to target me specifically, which based on their method of attack seemed unlikely. I took away one thing from the Stygian Order agent: I needed to be stronger and beef up my defense. If shit like this was going to keep happening, I needed to be prepared. His warning about the Enchanters Guild was also concerning. It wasn't like there were rules against having your competition killed off. This was going to have to be my last bulk sale of runic items. I would need to find sources of income in other ways. Another surprise was the fact that Reaper failed to work on the man, even when he was sitting right across from me. I knew from experience that if I had a general description of a person I could track them. The better the image or memory, the more accurate the tracking was. This man was like a ghost. It led me to the conclusion that that was not what he truly looked like. After resting the night, I made good on the entry to the bazaar and sold off my gear. I also sold that massive dream crystal to a specialized buyer that was immune to the effects. That one item alone netted me almost 10,000 credits. I purchased a large quantity of gear to complete the third barge along with some spare mithril for making more long-term sensors. After that purchase, I found a skilled armorer that let me watch as he crafted my new armor for me. It cost me extra for the tutoring, but I learned a lot. The new armor was made from some scaled leather, almost like snakeskin, only much thicker. The scales were about the size of a penny and were harder than steel. It also had good elemental resistance. The upper chest was covered with a solid piece of mithril with a smaller piece that was articulated below it. With magic and skills, making armor shaped to deflect didn't do much, so most armors were highly ornamental instead. I just opted for a simple body-hugging outline considering I would be doing up the runes myself. My arms were now no longer exposed as flat diamonds of metal linked with chains covered down to my elbow, with the remains of my arm covered by just the scaled leather. I had tested out many different armor types thanks to the man's inventory and found this to give me the best protection without losing out too much on mobility. The back of the armor had overlapping pieces of mithril in the shape of short spiked backbones going all the way to the bottom. That protected my spine, but I had also opted for a mesh of mithril that covered the entire back. It added much more protection than just the scaled leather but didn't inhibit me in any way. To complete the armor I had a helmet constructed with no open hole to see through. I had a way to fix that issue. The pants were also made from the same scaled leather and I was glad the material was so soft and flexible. Affixed to the front thigh and shin were plates of mithril. That left only my hands exposed. I did commission a pair of leather gloves made from the same leather as my armor, but I would only ever wear one of them. People might think it weird or some requirement to use my magic. It took 4 full days to finish up the armor and I had learned enough that I could begin trying to make my own. When I put the armor on, it made me look like some sort of hero general. It was a perfect fit and the material had even a little give to it so it could stretch or shrink to always hug my body. I couldn't wait to get back home to add the runes to it and make it a true masterwork. Chapter 153, Returning to Work. Our little trip had taken quite a bit longer than expected. But I hadn't been expecting to sign up for a fighting competition and then be forced to fight off a group of religious nuts. So I guess 3 weeks being gone wasn't so bad, all things considered. I did notice that over half of the sensors had failed in the time we were out of St. June though. Ska decided to stick with me for now and I decided not to stop off near Houston. I did send Martin a message though, so hopefully he could update me on what was happening. As we approached the town, I only saw one of the barges. I had hoped both would be here, but I would inquire about that after I landed. Is there anything to hunt around here? Ska asked as we stepped off the ramp. I heard there were some elementals north of town. East just leads you toward the sulfur springs where we defeated the jackals. I'm not sure if there are any dungeons near the mountains, but I would imagine there should be a few. Ska rumbled in discontent and I just shrugged. Very well, I will take the measure of these elementals. Are you busy or would you care to join me? Not right now. I gotta talk to some people and work on my new armor. After that, I should be able to free up some time. I'll send a message off to you, I replied. I will return when I receive the message. Have a productive hunt. He rushed off, scaring a few people as he ran through town. I groaned, knowing I would have to listen to Kurt complain about Ska's antics. Then again, if I kept myself too busy to talk, he wouldn't be able to complain to me. Yeah, that sounded like a plan. I quickly hurried off to my warehouse to find out what was going on. What do you mean, you couldn't find him? I asked Maria after she told me she returned without finding Javier or the other barge. We did as you asked, Mr. Paul, but he was not on the route we had taken before. I talked with a few of the locals in the smaller villages and some claimed to have seen the barge, but it was far off and never stopped in their town. One of the guards you hired said he would check it out. We waited 3 days but he never returned. We were afraid someone had ambushed him and decided to return for our safety. Damn it! I yelled, causing Maria to flinch back. Sorry, Maria, I'm not angry with you, or the guards, you did the right thing. How long ago was this? Well, it was about 4 days after we left that we got to the town that said they had seen the barge. I had to think back. She left about a week before I did, so the day I left they were returning to relay the information to me. I felt like an idiot. I wasted 3 weeks when I could have been searching for my lost employee and property. All right, no trips out until I locate Javier. What about the merchants, Mr. Paul? They have been quite angry about not being able to go back out. Tell them if they have a problem with it, that they can come to see me or go back to the old way they made money. And tell anyone, that doesn't raise too much of a ruckus, that the fees for the next trip will be reduced to a quarter. She nodded. Now I gotta go restock before I can head out. Is there anything else I need to know? I asked, directing my question to everyone in the room. Charles spoke up, the wall is almost complete, the dry dock is ready for the next barge, other than that I think we are just waiting. I nodded. Charles, go speak with Kurt and see if he was able to secure any mithril. Let him know I would come myself but I have to leave again. I will speak with him when I return. Also, Timothy, I want you to fab up 24 of those rings I asked you about before we left. Here is enough mithril to get you started. Timothy accepted the metal and looked it over. I can try, but I haven't ever worked with mithril. Anything I should know? It's pretty brittle after it's worked but it's soft until it is treated. Similar to gold, although, I don't think you can anneal it. If it cracks just melt it down again. When I get back I can show the 4 of you how to properly temper it, to bring out its enhanced properties. I looked at my watch, it had been 2 hours since I returned, so calling Ska back would take some time. I will be in town for a few more hours before I lift off again. I'll leave the rest to you. The 4 men nodded, leaving to go do their assigned tasks. Maria was still standing there, wringing her shirt in worry. I sighed. Do you want to come with us when we search for Javier? Her face brightened at that. If it isn't any trouble, Mr. Paul. It's fine, come on. You can take Martin's old room. She nodded rapidly and followed behind as I swiftly headed back toward the fortress. I sent a quick message off to Ska asking him to return as soon as possible. Maria, why didn't you or the others send me a message about this? We did, Mr. Paul, did you not receive it? No, I did not. When was it sent? As soon as we returned to port and spoke with Mr. Charles. When you didn't return we figured you weren't too worried about it. So either Charles sent it and it was intercepted, or he never sent the message. I wanted to believe the former since Charles was an extremely competent foreman, but I couldn't rule out the possibility. Then again, neither was a good option. There was a third option I needed to consider, thanks to the words from that Stygian order man. The message tokens were enchantment items. Who's to say they couldn't intercept, disable, or redirect them completely? I hoped I was wrong and they were not involved in the theft of the barge. Once back aboard the fortress, I showed Maria around quickly and pointed out where she would be sleeping. This is so amazing, Mr. Paul, to think you made all of this. It's not all that impressive, I just slapped some stuff together. It needs updating. You would be surprised to know the barge is actually a significant improvement over the fortress. The fortress just has more creature comforts. Make yourself at home, I have to do some work before we go. The awestruck teen nodded absently as she roved around, looking at everything. I figured it would be at least 3 hours before Scar returned. It wouldn't give me time to complete my armor, but I could get a good start on it. I headed up to my workroom and unloaded my ring, setting the armor on a wooden dummy. I also set 3 new weapons into the weapon rack. They weren't anything super special like my current ones, but with some runes, they would add to my flexibility. One of the items I had purchased was a dual-bladed sword staff. Yeah, I know how goofy that sounds, but I tested the weapon out before I purchased it. My normal staff skills worked with it, but I needed to work on aligning the blade when I attacked. The last bladed staff I had was more for stabbing. This weapon could be used for that, but also for slashing attacks. Having come across opponents that needed to be hacked apart, it was an area I needed to fill. I also picked up a mace. Consuming Void had the function to reduce its length, but I wanted a stand-alone mace. A purpose-built weapon would always be better than one that had to be modified to fit a role. The other staff was just a standard quarterstaff, capped with metal. Simple and unassuming. After setting everything out, I started laying out the runic design. Gone was the Tree of Life design. My new armor wasn't going to be shielded like my old set. That being said, it was going to be much more complicated. With my high intelligence and skill at creating a few masterwork items, I thought I could pull it off. Initial tests on the flight back from Vegas showed the idea was feasible. My work was interrupted by a message popping up in my face. Martin had finally gotten back to me. Glad you're back. Events in Houston have taken a turn for the worse. Do you recall Feline Rosewell? She is that girl that tried to control Ska. We are almost certain it was her father that gave the information to the dwarves. Probably as revenge for her death. We can't prove anything though, but based on his actions since that day, it's the only plausible explanation. Edward Rosewell, the father, is trying to get himself elected mayor. Normally I would say he didn't have a chance, but he is either paying people or threatening them to champion his cause. He is using the time-tested methods of fear to drive the populace to his side, and it's working. The mayor is losing support daily as he hasn't brought anyone to justice due to the attack. I fear he might throw me under the bus to appease his constituents. It's time we leave Houston. Fiona and I will set up outside of Houston. If we don't see you within a week, we will move north to the Hornwell estate and wait for you there. Don't do anything dumb like attacking Mr. Rosewell. It will only cement his position. Good luck, we will see you soon. Martin and Fiona. Fuck, fuck, fuck. Just when I thought shit couldn't get worse, it did. Despite Martin's warning, I did want to go just end the man and the threat he posed. But I knew if I did that, there would be no returning to Houston, the alliance would probably come crumbling apart and I would be hunted down. Yet I still wanted to go do it. I took a few deep breaths to get my anger under control. I needed to act more rationally. It was obvious the man had planned this all out in detail. The fact that there was no evidence to show that he was guilty meant there was little I could do but hope that the marshal or that spineless mayor could turn things around. Martin and Fiona disappearing probably wouldn't help the mayor's cause, but it was better than having him arrested or worse. I had an idea on how to change the tide. I pulled out another message card and sent it off to the marshal. He was the last person I could trust to see it through. As for Martin and Fiona, they were going to have to sit and wait. I couldn't detour to meet up with them with Javier missing. They could take care of themselves though. I checked the time. Ska should be returning shortly. I headed downstairs just in time to hear the door opening. I got the supplies you asked for and hurried back as quickly as possible. What's going on? Ska panted. Javier is missing, along with the other barge. We're going to go look for him. Put the food in the fridge and I'll get us in the air. Oh, we have a guest, Maria. She is coming along to help us search. Ska just nodded as he headed toward the kitchen. The trip to Vegas and back had depleted a considerable amount of our stored foodstuff. We had military rations and dried foods for an emergency, but I would prefer to leave them for an actual emergency. With Ska restocking the fridge, we should be set for a week between the 3 of us. Chapter 154, Lost. I let Maria steer the fortress since she knew where we needed to go to start our search. I had ways to locate both Javier and the barge, but they were both beyond the range of either option currently. At least I hoped Javier was just beyond the range. The other possibility was not one to dwell on at the moment. My working sensors were still picking up people following us, but once we crossed out of sight of land and headed over the open ocean, they wouldn't be able to track us as easily. I'm sure they already knew where I was headed, considering their capabilities and reach. Ska was downstairs keeping Maria company while I worked on my armor. It was going to be 3 full days of flying to cross the ocean. I only took breaks to help charge the monohearts every few hours or so. I examined the armor in front of me, slowly turning it on the rotating dummy. I was checking all of the layout work I had added to see if I made any mistakes before I started on the actual carving. My Magebane armor was nice, having the ability to absorb most magic. Unfortunately, the leather of my new armor didn't have the same resistance to magic. I could have gone with wyvern skin again, but I had opted for the new leather for a few reasons. It was more flexible, which made it easier to move in while retaining a high armor value. But the biggest bonus was its ability to self-repair. I had seen similar armors during my many trips to the bazaar. They were always outrageously expensive. Every merchant I spoke with said it was worth the cost just to not have to repair the armor. I had asked about the metal pieces, but apparently, a skilled enough crafter could carry over the self-repair feature into any piece attached to the armor. Hence the reason why you would sometimes see masterwork full plate with the leather lining the interior. Anyone who could afford a set of armor like that probably wasn't on the front line though. The price tag for a very bare-bones set had started at 120,000 credits. That was 3 times the cost of my hand, and my hand had been purpose-built for me by a master craftsman. But the prices didn't stop there. One merchant I talked with quite a bit allowed me to see a special ordered set that came in at 400,000 credits. I could easily see why it had cost so much. It was a work of art, inlaid with gold and silver over the mithril. Every open space was filled with densely packed enchantments or detail work. Even getting near the armor, you could feel the power that radiated off of it. It had been commissioned for some planetary emperor to commemorate the 10th year of his victory to control his planet. I hadn't even known planetary emperors were a thing. Thankfully, the species was non-human and didn't do well in environments below the boiling point of water. When I looked back at my armor, that suit had been an inspiration for me. Not that I could mimic the enchantments. I was more after the feeling I got when I looked upon it. Runic patterns snaked across every bit of metal on my armor, the design, dipping, and weaving amongst itself in what looked like a mess at first but showed itself to be purposeful in nature. It was as far from the rigid enchantment designs as you could get. The looping designs ended with the head of a snake biting its own tail. The eyes were tiny monohearts set above my heart. The gems were needed not to power the armor but to store the converted energy. I had seen what fighters on my level were capable of, and I had no feasible way to beat someone who specialized as I currently was. It was possible I could find a skill that let me enhance my body as much as they seemed to, but I already had similar skills and wasn't sure they would work in tandem. So this was my answer. A complicated set of runes that converted damage into body strengthening. The conversion rate was poor, but that was by design. My body needed to grow used to the changes. Going too fast would have similar effects as activating my aura of rage. Tattooing hadn't worked out to enhance my body, but I already knew this would work based on some tests I ran. If it seemed like my body was in danger, I could change the conversion back to the armor, allowing it to further strengthen itself. This change was also permanent as my body adjusted to the new norm. It wouldn't enhance any of my attributes, but it would allow me to push myself further, especially using Aura of Rage. That wasn't all though. I incorporated a similar set of runes as I had in my defensive necklace, allowing the armor to spread an impact to the entire piece. Hard to pierce armor when all your impact is spread out. It wouldn't do anything against skills that could nullify or reduce armor, but little could, short of a magical barrier. But I liked this better because it didn't need to be recharged. The helmet was particularly tricky. There were no slits in the helmet to see out of, instead, the face formed into the snarling visage of a raver beast, my homage to my dearly missed mount, Bella. The outside consisted of the same runes, but the inside was where it got special. I had stumbled across this particular combination while toying around one day. I just hadn't figured out what to use them for. But now I knew. The interior runes made it so the helmet disappeared from view completely from the inside. In effect, it was partial invisibility. I had no obstructed view, but I was fully protected and hidden from the outside. I spent nearly as much time adding the runes to the helmet as I did the entire chest piece, thanks to the awkward angle and space to work. As with the chest piece, the helmet contained 2 fire-red mana hearts inset into the eyes. The pants and gloves came next. They were much simpler as they only had slightly curved plates on the front and top. It took me every waking moment of our crossing to finish the armor. Well, not every moment, I did sleep a bit and help out every few hours, but the majority of the time had been spent on the armor. I slipped it on, adjusting the bindings a bit. It didn't need much in the way of adjustment, thanks to the flexibility of the leather. After putting on the helmet, I looked into the mirror. It looked like some demented scientist had brought dinosaurs back to life and mixed their DNA with humans. If I hadn't been the one wearing the armor, I would be afraid of a person that was. It emitted a presence similar to how Dominion and Destruction did, only milder, but terrifying all the same. Mantle of Ouroboros, set. Quality, masterwork. Armor, 45. Slashing resistance, 70%. Stabbing resistance, 85%. Blunt resistance, 60%. Magic resistance, 50%. Elemental resistance, 40%. Body reinforcement, 1/100 of damage absorbed. Self-repair, can fully repair all damage within 12 hours. Spread impact, reduces impact by 70% by shunting the momentum to the rest of the armor. Unobscured vision, the helmet does not obscure vision when worn. This masterfully crafted armor set is made from Hydra skin and mithril and has inherent self-repair properties. When worn as a set, the repair speed is increased by 10%. Runic enhancement has given life to this armor, allowing for the inherent soul of the Hydra to leak through slightly. Those not scared off by this effect and still attack have their damage converted into energy to strengthen the wearer's body and mind. The armor was everything I hoped it would be. I could even toggle the runes, turning them on or off. This was part of my built-in safety feature. After what happened with my staff, I didn't want the same thing to happen while I was wearing armor. I could remove it through my ring, but then it was just a time bomb waiting to go off. Turning it off didn't disable the Hydra aura, but removing the helmet did, as it was a set effect. That was good, wearing it around constantly would be a hassle. I could conjure it on my head in a moment anyway. Plus I still had my necklace. It just couldn't be used when I was wearing all the armor. I set the fortress down out of sight of the small town, there was no point scaring the locals. I was glad I brought Maria along. My Spanish was rusty at best, having not used it since high school. For whatever reason, the system didn't translate languages you already knew at least partially. It helped that Maria had been here before. I let her do all the talking while Ska scouted around to see if he could find anything. I did get a faint hit on my tracking device for the barge, and it was far to the south. So far that Javier was not within range of Reaper. Still, I waited for Ska to return from scouting and Maria to speak with the locals to see what she could learn. I could tell I made them nervous, but I didn't stray far from Maria. If this had been a plot by locals to steal the barge, I wasn't about to hand them another hostage. Gracias, heard Maria say before she nodded to the 2 women she had been speaking with and hurried back over toward me. Mr. Paul, they say that some local thugs are no longer around and disappeared around the same time the barge was spotted. They also said that the guard returned a few days after we were last here and headed back north on foot. Well, at least that is some good news. I think I got a trace on the barge, let's go collect Ska and get moving. It didn't take long to locate Ska, he was already making his way back. Find anything? I asked. No, he hissed. I'm not surprised, it's been weeks and I'm not sure Javier even set down near the village. I think my tracker picked up the barge far to the south, so we need to get moving. Ska nodded and we headed for the fortress. This was not going to be a quick trip. I knew that Javier was still alive, though if the barge had gone that far south. It wouldn't still be moving if he were dead, as only a select few people could fly them. I had told Javier and Maria that the keys were bound to them, but that wasn't technically true. A rune built into the console could detect their mana signature, and I used that to make sure only they could use the key. This made it so they had to be alive and capable of feeding their mana into the system for the key to operate. The only way past this restriction was the tattoos that Martin, Ska, and I had. Just another safety feature I built in for my employees. If they were killed after the system was activated, the barge control room would detonate, taking anyone inside with it. That was one feature I would never be telling Maria or Javier about. That was how I knew Javier was still alive. If any of those scenarios had happened, my tracker would have thrown a red light along with the location. I didn't know how far the tracker covered, but I knew my Reaper title covered approximately 500 miles. Even at the fortress's top speed, it was going to take a week to catch up if it didn't keep moving south. If it did, it could be 2 more weeks before we finally caught up. One of my souped-up vehicles might have been a better option as they were significantly faster, but they couldn't go the distance like the fortress. Chapter 155, Found. It was a full 3 days before my Reaper title picked up Javier's location. That gave me a good estimate of how far the tracker reached. I figured it was around 1,000 miles. It wasn't a perfect estimate though, as the barge was traveling away from us almost the entire time. It seemed that whoever was giving the orders on the barge wanted to get into South America. Probably to avoid exactly what was happening right now. Maybe they figured if they got far enough away, even if I could track them, that I would just write it off. Well, they didn't know me very well. The barge I didn't care too much about, it could be replaced, but I had grown to like Javier. He was quiet but worked hard. I treated him and Maria more like siblings than employees. I tried to follow the path of the barge as closely as I could. It would seem whoever was in control skirted over the Pacific Ocean to avoid the larger population centers. That was probably smart, seeing as Mexico City looked like a wasteland and we saw no fewer than a dozen ongoing magical fights as we flew over. They could be easily seen as they lit up the night sky in dazzling color. It made me wary of what was down there. I knew anything that had survived this long and was constantly fighting was likely to be near my level, if not higher. We were forced to stop on the 5th day to resupply. It was only thanks to the barge stopping as well. The area we stopped in would have been an ideal place to live. Rolling hills dotted with trees with a backdrop of snow-capped mountains to the west. All things that weren't there prior to the system. I believed we were somewhere near Honduras, but I couldn't be certain. The new landmass really threw off my sense of scale. It was large, extending far beyond the line of sight. As for the reason it wasn't ideal, that would have to do with the locals. The 3-meter-tall quadrupeds were a mix between a rhino and an elephant with the temperament of a pissed-off grizzly bear. We hadn't been on the ground for more than 10 minutes before a group came charging at us. I fired off a few spells as I started backpedaling toward the fortress. It only seemed to enrage the creatures more. I could outrun them or outfly them, but Maria couldn't, so Ska and I needed to keep the creatures occupied until she got on board. They finally got into the range of identify and I got a look at what we were dealing with. Gorelephant level 26. Ska, try to break them up, we need to keep them away from Maria and the fortress. I yelled. I can help, Mr. Paul. Maria shouted as she ran. Get to the fortress first, then hit them with your spells. We can't afford to be held up if more of these creatures appear. I saw her reluctantly nod from the corner of my vision as she started running again. I wasn't going to be holding back in this fight, and she would be in danger as much from me as she would be from the creatures. My helmet appeared on my head, sealing around the armor and activating the aura. The closest gorelephant skidded to a stop and trumpeted out a challenge before it came right for me. I fired off an annihilator sphere, impacting the creature right in its massive chest. There was a blackened mark where the spell impacted, but its endurance was high enough that it shrugged off the special effect. I cursed, readying one more spell before the beast was upon me. I fired off Energy Lance, managing to hit the massive creature in the side of its head. It didn't slow, but it distracted it long enough that I was able to activate Unstoppable Force in my wings. I collided with the mountain of muscle and was sent bouncing across the terrain. I only took minor damage as my spell wore out near the end of my tumble. I wasn't sure quite what happened, but if I had to guess, the creature had a similar skill as Unstoppable Force but of a higher level. When I looked up, I could see the creature shaking off its disorientation from the impact. I looked to see how Ska was holding up. He had 2 of the creatures trying to pound him into the dirt with their massive feet. But he was dancing around them and slicing up their thick hide. Even that was only enough to produce a trickle of blood. I quickly got to my feet as the last 2 were charging my way. I guess brute force isn't going to do it today, I groaned. I cast an overcharged frost wave at the rapidly approaching pair. One of the behemoths slipped and fell on the ice, but the other one avoided the majority of the spell's effect. It was still slowed though. It swung its thick barbed trunk at me and I cast Time Shudder to avoid the attack and smacked it with a combination of Corrupting Touch and Calcifying Strike. It grunted in pain and reared back to try and flatten me as a bolt of corruption struck its flank, care of Maria, who was now at the top of the ramp with the door open. I wanted to stay and kill off these creatures, but I could already hear angry trumpet calls in the distance along with the thunder of more feet. Ska! Hamstring them as best as you can and run for the fortress, we gotta get out of here, more are coming. I didn't wait for a reply, I fired clinging spray at the one next to me and started to run. The first one I had stunned was back up and charging me again. I threw a wave of disruption across my path, preventing the creature from easily getting to me and the fortress. Maria had smartly run inside to open the inner door and prepped for takeoff. Ska passed me, heading for the ramp, and I looked behind to see 3 beasts bearing down on me. I decided to give my new spell a test and cast an overcharged brimstone right in the path of 2 of them. Nobody likes fire, except maybe fire elementals, and these weren't them. They tried to halt their charge but both skidded into the wall. They came out the other side shrieking and hopping around, trying to put the demonic fire out. The third one bolted for the hills when he saw his fellow Gorlophants blazing away. I didn't stick around to watch as I cast regenerating rain over the area the fire was at. I had learned that the spell counted as holy water. I didn't want to extinguish the beasts, but I also didn't want a hellfire-based wildfire to spread. It worked as the fire went out and the burned beasts healed. They had lost their frenzy to kill us however and ran off to join their other pack mates. There was one upside: the one affected with corrupting touch and calcifying strike had succumbed to its wounds. The experience was enough to jump Maria all the way to level 13. Considering she had helped fight off something over twice her level, it was no surprise. Ska had earned some experience as well, being in the same party, but it wasn't enough to push him over 20. I figured he had to be getting close though. After our run-in with the Gorlophants, we didn't stop anywhere long. When we did, Ska would go and hunt some food down. Even with that supplementing our food supplies, it wasn't enough and I had to break out the mres to everyone's disappointment. It took another week to catch up with the barge. We were now trailing behind it, waiting for it to land before I decided what to do. The chase had taken us into what I assumed was Colombia based on having passed the Panama Canal, what was left of it anyway. The massive landmass that had been attached, continued all the way to South America, making the passage a dead end. It was no surprise that the barge drew considerable interest among the locals. A few vehicles even tried to chase it down and fired spells at it, but the thick metal and height of their passage made it hard to damage. It did allow me my first look at what the people aboard were capable of as they fired a few spells in return. There was a lot of yelling and backslapping from the group on board, making me think they were not all that old. I glanced at Maria, trying to see her reaction. She looked angry and I swear I heard her mutter something under her breath, but I didn't catch what she said. The barge continued until it lost its pursuers and eventually set down in a jungle valley. No roads led into the valley, but a large rock-strewn area near a river made an ideal landing spot. The last rays of the sun were setting as I saw the people on board light a few fires. A rough estimate made me think there were about 20 kidnappers. I hadn't spotted Javier yet, but I assumed they kept him in the control room. I still wasn't sure how they had gotten into it, but it was a security issue I would try and resolve. We found a spot a few miles away and I used the fortress to shove trees aside. It wasn't perfect, but I didn't want to spend hours looking for an ideal landing spot, only to have the barge take off again. Okay, there are a lot of hostiles and we don't have a good idea of their levels. We can't let them harm Javier, so let's try to do this quickly and quietly. Ska, I want you to retrieve Javier while I pull the people toward me. Maria, stick close to me so I can heal you and run if I tell you to, understood? She nodded and Ska grinned at me. If it looks like a fight we can win, once Ska gets Javier away from them, we will deal with their group. If it looks like they could be more trouble than they are worth, we will retreat to the fortress and use it to obliterate the area. Neither commented on the plan. I left it as simple as possible, knowing things were likely going to change quickly. Alright, gear up, and let's go rescue Javier. Chapter 156, Choices. The dense vegetation and thick vines made traversing the jungle difficult for Maria and me. More Maria than I, as I had much higher agility. Ska had no issues as this was his element. No sooner had we stepped inside the foliage than he practically disappeared from view, thanks to his mottled fur. Ska would do what he did best and scout out our path ahead, warning us if we needed to deter. Stealth wasn't needed thanks to the incessant drone of bugs and animal noises. You had to practically shout to be heard over the sounds. Which was good because hacking through the jungle wasn't a quiet affair. Ska kept returning and adjusting our course as we pushed ahead. I could tell we were getting close from the sounds of the river in the distance. The darkness was all-consuming and made me feel wary of what lurked just beyond my limited sight. I stopped Maria and handed her a bottle, motioning for her to drink it. She did with a bit of hesitation. The effects were immediate as I drank mine. The darkness seemed to retreat as the night vision potion took hold. It was good for an hour and was one of many potions I had purchased over the last few months. My tattoo worked as well, but its field of view was more limited. Plus the light would give us away since I wasn't wearing my helmet. I spotted Ska making his way back to us and he motioned for us to follow. Slowly we crept up to the treeline. I didn't need night vision to see the barge or the party happening on board. There was a lot of yelling, drinking, and general ass-hattery going on. It looked like a normal party filled with ignorant, drunk, unsupervised teenagers. Now, I hadn't run into a whole lot of teenagers since the world went to shit. Maria and Javier had been the first real examples and they were on the older spectrum. It was pretty much what I had expected to see when a bunch of unruly children was given godlike powers. They were trying to one-up each other and had constant duels to see who was the strongest. I knew they were duels because everyone was walking away without injury. I turned to Ska and whispered, "Do you think you can get in and out unnoticed?" I watched him scan the barge before he pointed to a darker section near the command center, opposite the door into it. "I can sneak in from that side, but you need to draw their attention." I scratched my head, thinking of a way to draw their attention. My gaze slipped toward the water and I got an idea. Ska rushed off and would signal me with a small mirror when he was ready. It wasn't the first time we used the mirror method to plan an ambush. "Stay close," I said quietly to Maria as I waited for Ska's signal. After 10 minutes I spotted 3 quick flashes from the dark corner of the barge. I motioned for Maria to follow as I made my way along the tree line and toward the river. As soon as I got close enough, I cast brimstone on the water. I was glad the spell only required somatic components. The surface of the river where I cast the spell burst into flame and Maria and I quickly made our way back to the path we had carved through the jungle. It didn't take long for the revelers to notice the out-of-place fire. A few of the braver ones jumped from the barge and walked over toward the water, cocky as could be. They weren't stupid though, looking around warily while they had weapons out. Ska waited in the darkness for the distraction. When it happened he was like a deadly ghost as he slipped past everyone and made it to the door unnoticed. He opened the door to the command center but found it empty. He suppressed a hiss of annoyance and looked over the group of people. His gaze landed on his target, standing next to a taller human. They were walking toward the riverside of the barge to see what the noise was about, but nobody else was near them. Ska didn't hesitate as he bounded across the metal deck, toward the duo. The taller man must have heard something as he stopped and turned. He didn't have time to pull his weapon though as Ska bounded into him, using the man's body as a springboard. The man went tumbling across the deck, knocking others over as Ska grabbed the stunned Javier and rushed back toward the treeline. He could hear shouts as the men had figured something was amiss. But Ska was leaping off the end of the barge before the first spell was shot in his direction. I groaned as I heard the shouts and saw the spells. Ska was slowed by having to carry Javier but not enough for the other people aboard to catch him before he made it back to us. "What didn't you understand about quiet?" I hissed. Ska shrugged. He wasn't in the command room, I had to improvise. "Fine, let's get out of here." As I turned around, a massive red wall surrounded the area, cutting off any retreat. When I looked back I saw it covered an enormous area. I touched the glowing barrier with my bare finger and felt the tip of my finger slough off before I could pull my hand back. I healed the minor damage and put my glove back on. "Well, looks like we have to fight, you good Javier." "Mr. Paul? What's going on, why are you here?" he asked in confusion. I didn't have time to answer him as 5 figures surrounded us, standing far enough away that most attacks would be easily avoided. The 5 only watched and made sure we stayed in place as the slower members caught up. All of them looked pissed off, but none more so than a tall boy, with a fresh trail of blood running down his nose. He wiped it on his sleeve before he spoke in Spanish. I only understood a bit of Spanish and the system refused to translate for me. "Sorry, I don't speak Spanish," I replied, getting a measure of the group by using Identify. I was surprised at some of the levels as a few of the people were already level 16. Most were closer to 12 though. I said, "I'm going to make your big kitty pay for attacking us, you fucking gringo. Did you understand that? As much as I would like to see you try, how about you let us go and I let you walk away?" The teen looked around at his gang with a smirk on his face before turning back to me. "Oh, and you think the 3 of you can take us all down? You may have gotten the drop on me, but now you are outnumbered and your few extra levels aren't going to mean shit when we turn the area you are standing in into a molten crater." I was about to correct him and say 4 when I heard Maria scream. "Javier, no." I wasn't yet wearing my helmet to keep the aura deactivated and Javier did the smart thing, going straight for my head. Too bad he didn't know about my defensive necklace. I felt the crack of his staff as it impacted my skull, but it was muted as the pain was transferred over my entire body and absorbed. In the next instant two things happened. My helmet appeared on my head, causing the aura of the armor to burst forth, and my vision went red as aura of rage inadvertently triggered, flooded my body at the betrayal. A few of the lower-leveled people took a step back in fright as both the aura of my armor and my skill washed over them. Ska had already subdued Javier as I stepped forward, consuming void appearing in my hand. I was done talking. I had given them a choice, and they had chosen very poorly. The night was filled with screams and punctuated by bright flashes and malevolent energies as the battle raged inside the glowing cage. The 5 people with speed-boosting abilities were the hardest to deal with, but I methodically chased each one down and dealt the killing blow. Ska stuck near Maria, who had turned into a tear-filled mess as she watched the horror show unfold around her. She wasn't built to kill humans. Sometimes I wished I hadn't been either. The leader I left for last as he finally lowered the barrier and tried to flee into the jungle. It was too little, too late. He put up one hell of a fight though, using more spells with that same red energy that the barrier had been made from. It cut through the trees like butter as he whipped deadly strings around to try and keep me away. But all he was doing was flailing about in a panic, and I easily avoided the attacks. I cornered him in a small gully and finally subdued him, keeping him alive for the moment. I had some questions for him and Javier. The first rays of dawn rippled across the surface of the river as I dipped my toes in while retrieving 2 large buckets of water. I shivered despite the warm air before I stepped out of the flowing water and went to where Javier and our other bound friend were tied up. Both sported slave collars, and I had to grimace as I looked at them. Too many bad memories, but it was necessary to keep them compliant. I set a bucket down in front of each man before I turned to Ska. Please take Maria back to the fortress and bring it here. Ska nodded silently as he led the red and puffy-eyed girl away. I waited until they were in the forest before I grabbed the bucket next to the unknown man and dumped it across his face. He sputtered awake and his eyes darted about until they landed on me. I watched him try and wrench his arms free, then try to cast his spells to free himself. I waited until he realized he was helpless in front of me before I bent down next to him. Why did you take Javier and my property, and how did you turn him against me? The teenager tried to spit on me, but he was at an awkward angle and it went wide. I hardened my voice. I'm not going to ask nicely again. Fuck you. Alright. I grabbed him by one ankle and started dragging him toward the river. What are you doing? Let me go, you fucking lunatic. I ignored his protests, his screams for help, and him trying to kick my hand from his ankle. It was all useless as I dragged him bodily behind me and into the river face down. I let him struggle for a bit before I hauled his face out of the water. Are you going to answer me now? Fuck why? I shoved his head back into the water and down into the rocky bottom before he finished his reply. I held him there as he struggled in my grasp before I pulled him out and tossed him onto the shore. He gasped for breath as he spit out water. While he recovered, I pulled his boots off. What are you doing? He asked in wide-eyed panic. You answer my questions, not the other way around. When he wasn't forthcoming with an answer, I sprayed the tender bottoms of his feet with boiling oil while he screamed. The kid turned out to be one hard-ass motherfucker. But he broke eventually, telling me the whole plan had been Javier's idea. I wasn't sure I believed that. I knew how easily teenagers caved to peer pressure, and Javier was a very passive person. But it would explain Javier's attack. Their plan was to rob towns in South America and live it up like some sort of post-apocalyptic pirate kings. They had already robbed a few people, leaving more than a few corpses in their wake. After I finished questioning the kid, I tossed him back into the river as he struggled. He didn't make it very long as I saw his death notification pop up before I made it back to the still unconscious Javier. I pulled over a crate that had fallen from the barge and sat on it facing Javier. In my hands was the same staff I had gifted him just before I left for Vegas, the same one he had attempted to bash my head in with the night before. My knuckles were white as I held the lovingly crafted weapon and it audibly creaked below my grip. You can stop pretending to be unconscious, I said tiredly. Javier opened his eyes and looked at me. No, he glared at me, hate was all I could see. Gone was the false mask of a shy teenager he had worn to fool me and everyone close to him. At that moment I realized the other kid had told me the truth. Nothing to say? Not even going to try and explain your actions? Javier remained silent and I sighed. You know, I could have forgiven you for taking the barge and going off on this ill-fated adventure, but I can't forgive you for attempting to kill me. I guess I'm partly to blame for this mess. You fooled me, I can't say many people are capable of that anymore. He finally deigned to speak. Fuck you, Mr. Paul, you come down to Mexico and think you are top dog. You are nothing but another parasite on our land, just like the rest of you Americans, he said with dripping disdain. Are you going to drown me like you did Juan, you fucking coward? Javier spit, a note of well-hidden fear in his voice. I didn't know if that fear was real or manufactured, it didn't much matter at this point. I shook my head, standing up. No, Javier, I replied. I had to forgive his ignorance, he had been unconscious the entire night and hadn't witnessed me kill all of his friends. I looked down at the foolish teen one last time. I had treated him like family, maybe not like a son but as a close nephew. I had given him opportunities that very few would or could offer, and this was the thanks I got in return. My eyes hardened with resignation as a single tear rolled down my cheek. With all of the force I could muster, I smashed his head in with his own weapon. His body fell to the ground as blood and brain matter seeped across the stones. I heaved in a shuddering breath and hurled the weapon into the river. Javier's betrayal had hurt me more than anything I had suffered since the system arrived. While Fiona had betrayed me, it wasn't the same. She had done it out of a misguided notion that I was luring her into a trap. Not even the predations I suffered at the hands of Charla and the Black Dragons hurt as much as this one teenager's betrayal, and that fact made me irrationally angry. Feelings I had bottled up and tried to hide for so long came spilling out, and I was glad nobody was around to see the state I was in. It took time for me to get my emotions back under control, my throat hoarse from my screams and my face a mess. I couldn't afford to devolve back to my soulless state like when I was a slave, but I also couldn't afford to bare my heart and soul for everyone that died. A numb ache settled over me as I looked at the slowly cooling body on the ground. The blood had already dried over the pebbles of the beach. I wrapped Javier's body in a piece of fabric and carried it to the river, letting it float away. I returned to the spot where I had dealt the killing blow and used the last bucket of water to wash the blood off the stones. I didn't want Maria to see the body or the blood stain. She was traumatized enough by watching me butcher the others. As for the weapon, I didn't want a daily reminder of what I had been forced to do. Chapter 157, Morning. The trip back was a struggle, both emotionally and physically. The first physical obstacle was the barge itself. Taking it with us would make us a huge target. Leaving it behind would be a waste. I decided to remove anything of value and abandon the barge in the jungle. A plasma cutter helped make quick work of cutting the panels free. Removing the control systems and runic lines took longer, but within 2 days everything had been stripped, leaving nothing behind but a steel shell. I imagined a lot of confusion would follow for anyone coming across the sight of an ocean barge sitting in a jungle near a river barely large enough to float a canoe down. Maria remained silent on the trip home, with only the occasional sob slipping from her lips. She was having a hard time dealing with what happened, or I suspected what I had done. So it wasn't surprising when we arrived in St. June and she hurried off without a word. She needed time to grieve and process what had happened. I hoped she would continue working for me, but I couldn't assume she would. Not much had changed in St. June during our absence. The wall was finished and the third, now technically the second barge, was complete. Charles had done a fantastic job keeping the workers going even after we had been gone far longer than I thought. Almost a full month as opposed to the week I had initially planned for. Charles didn't ask about the absent Javier or the missing barge. He had witnessed a teary-eyed Maria hurry away after we landed. "Charles, can you find a new captain?" I asked, not quite ready to replace Maria yet. Yeah, I should be able to find a few people willing," he replied solemnly. "Thanks," I replied, patting him on the shoulder before I walked off to the warehouse where I could unload the gear I had stripped off the barge. I took the time to reflect on the battle. I hadn't wanted to do so earlier because killing Javier had been too fresh in my mind, and the rage I had felt at his betrayal twisted my thoughts. I had been angry during that fight, but I hadn't killed them all without knowing what I was doing. I almost wished I had blacked out during the rage, it would make dealing with this so much easier. I sighed and opened my menu to look at the skills I acquired. Most of the skills were trash and I would drop them using Void Lottery as quickly as I could. I had finally run out of open skill slots on my second class and was debating on whether I should swap my experience back over or not. For now, I just left it and got rid of Summon Pygmy Goat and Fuel the Anger. Fuel the Anger, especially with my mental state, seemed redundant and dangerous. It would be more beneficial now with my new armor, but I hadn't used it at all in my fight at the barge. So it was just taking up valuable space. I looked at what I got in return. Hex Circle, draw a magical circle along the ground in a 10-foot area. Allies within the circle gain a boost of 10% to their health and mana, which lasts for 5 minutes after they exit the circle. Enemies take a 10% loss of mana and health that lasts for 5 minutes after they enter the circle. Requires magical chalk. Lasts indefinitely or until the circle becomes damaged. Cost 400 mana. It was the first ability I had seen that required preparation. It kind of reminded me of the totem class I could have chosen. I did have an idea that might make the ability worth keeping, but I would need to test it out. The other only notable skill was the barrier that the gang leader had used. I had to engage him in combat 4 times before I managed to get it. It was a good thing that kicking an unconscious man counted toward entering into a new fight. Cage of Vengeance. Erect a cage of damaging energy that traps anything within. Cage dimensions are 10mxint, cost half caster's full mana. Cage causes damage equal to int every second of contact. Cage can be shrunk to half its area at the cost of a quarter of the caster's full mana, increasing damage to 2*int. Upkeep of cage is half caster's mana pool, or 3/4 if the cage is shrunk. After releasing the cage, mana regeneration is reduced by 50% for the full cage or 75% for the smaller cage for 1 hour. Cooldown 1 day. The spell was quite powerful, but it actually took away more mana the higher your intelligence became. Still, it would come in handy. I just needed to manage my mana if I used it. That left me with 5 useless abilities I had collected. I decided to add the boiling oil ability to that list, and over the next few days, I would recycle them to see what I got. The next week went by without much happening. I had sent a message off to Martin and gotten a reply, stating they had taken refuge at the Hornwell Ranch. Edward Rosewill had taken over as Houston's new mayor and fired Marshal Sumner. Rosewill replaced the marshal with his own guard captain. This didn't sit well with most of the marshal's men, and they up and left, following the marshal north to the Hornwell Ranch, where they were accepted with open arms. Martin said that information on Houston after that became spotty. Some people said that a lockdown was implemented and people were being kicked out of town if they couldn't meet some undefined goal that Rosewill put in place. Anyone trying to gain entry was fired upon by the mana cannons that the previous mayor had purchased from me. Martin also stated that a warrant had been issued for our arrest or proof of death. All in all, it was turning into a real clusterfuck over there. All the work Martin had put in to create the alliance had fallen apart. Rosewill didn't want to share his power with anyone and was essentially a dictator elected by the idiots within the city. I had a hard time feeling sorry for them, but something would have to be done about the threat that Houston now posed. Being smack dab in the middle of my trade routes, I couldn't send barges through there for fear that they would be attacked or confiscated. Attacking Houston would be too costly in lives and much more dangerous than attacking Randy Cotton in Chicago, thanks to all the mana cannons he now had at his disposal. I let Martin know to hang tight and I would see what I could come up with. I wasn't idle during the week. I had assembled all the new sensors and deployed them around town. Tim was now working on another dozen, thanks to Kit's people bringing back a few pounds of mithril. The guy still acted like an ass most of the time. I think he blamed me for all his woes. My goal was to make St. June a fortress of its own, making anyone think twice about attacking it. So I drew up plans for my earth mages to erect 12 towers along the wall with a short spire on the top of each of them. I left Kurt out of that planning. I then calculated the central point of the towers and had them erect a massive reinforced stone obelisk. Now it was time to take the idea to Kurt. "You want to erect shield towers?" Kurt asked in confusion. "Yes," I replied. "I don't know, it seems like overkill. We didn't have that many issues with beasts before the wall, but since it has gone up, we haven't had a single issue inside the city. So why would we need a shield? There are plenty of dangers out there that a wall simply won't stop. It's best to be prepared before trouble comes to your doorstep." "I don't know," Kurt said again, scratching his chin. "Not that I am against making the town safer, but I don't think we can pay for something like this. I am willing to fund the entire project. As this is going to be my headquarters, I don't want to come back from another long trip and find out the entire town was burned to the ground." He looked at me tersely. "I somehow think this wouldn't be needed if you hadn't moved into town." I shrugged, hiding my irritation. Some people envy or fear my success and will do whatever they can to stop it. Can you truly say that St. June hasn't prospered from just a few caravan trips? Kurt grunted noncommittally but didn't reply as he mulled over my words. "Fine, but eventually the city is going to decide we need a government, and if they decide your services aren't welcome, you are going to have to leave." "Fair enough," I replied, snatching up the blueprints and walking out. I couldn't leave my fate up to the whims of some shitty bureaucrats. Thankfully I knew someone who might be able to secure the seat of power. Would it piss Kurt off? Probably, but if the man was duly elected he had no say in the matter. I needed to find time to go visit him though. There was too much to do and too little time. It was another 2 weeks before I managed to get time to visit Martin and Fiona at the Hornwell Ranch. I did fly past Houston, and the outer city, beyond the walls, was in a sorry state. It seemed over half the city residents had been kicked out of the secure walls and forced to fend for themselves. With the marshal and his men gone, monsters had started to move back into the abandoned buildings, making it that much more dangerous. I saw a third wall had been erected within the city, walling off a small section of luxury skyscrapers. Edward Rosewell's new seat of power. I could tell that by the fact that over half the monocannons now dotted the top of that wall, instead of defending the outer wall. That wasn't the only thing. The light seemed to dance off the walls, and I spotted visible enchantments coating the exterior of the buildings within the compound. If Rosewell joined up with the Enchanters Guild, that just made things exponentially more difficult. We needed information we were sorely lacking. My thoughts drifted back to what the Stygian Order man had told me. Was this the first act of the Guild? If I was a massively powerful organization spread over multiple worlds, my first step would be securing all of the cities around bazaars. Even if they didn't get all of them, it would cement their power. I would have to keep an eye on them and Lord Victi. As Ska and I arrived at the ranch, Martin, Fiona, the Marshal, and Carlson Hornwell came to greet us. "Welcome back," Carlson said, "just wish it was under better circumstances." I nodded, shaking the man's hand and greeting the Marshal next. "Sorry about what happened to you." I was close to retiring anyway, getting too old for this shit." Still, it wasn't right. I hugged Fiona and slapped Martin on the shoulder. "Should have figured you couldn't stay out of trouble," I said with a grin. "Look who's talking. Anyway, this is only a temporary setback. Rosewell may have outplayed us, but he is short-sighted and driving people away. He will probably get strung up by his own people eventually," Martin added. I wanted to agree with Martin, but I wasn't so sure. "You keep saying that," Fiona replied, "but it's been almost 2 months. Yeah, I think Fiona might be right about this. When I flew past Houston, I saw the inner compound enhanced by enchantments. I think Rosewell may have joined up with the Enchanters Guild." Martin groaned. "So the reports were accurate. We were hoping they had been mistaken." I didn't bring up my conversation with the Stygian Order agent, mostly because I didn't trust everything that man had told me. "How about we all retire to the dining room and have a chat?" Hornwell suggested. A few topics were discussed in the meeting. Plans to get rid of Rosewell were high on that agenda, but most agreed that if rumors were true that attacking him directly without a solid plan was doomed to failure. "What about your trading route?" Carlson inquired. I knew this was going to be brought up, as trading had come to a halt for the entire time I was gone and only just resumed 2 days ago when Maria finally returned to work. She still refused to talk with me, but she talked with Charles and the others. I had already given Charles an updated travel route to avoid Houston, and we had enough merchants coming and going that the loss of access to the bazaar wasn't critical. I did expand our route north to Nashville though. If anything, we could gain some merchants from under the nose of the Mohe Council. If not, at least our merchants could resupply there. Those were both short-term solutions though. Yeah, sorry about not getting the word out, there was an issue I had to deal with personally and I lost one of my captains. The route is back on track, but it is considerably slower until I get another barge going again. So figure 2 or 3 weeks until it shows up. Sorry to hear about your captain and the problems, Carlson added. I guess I should bring up why I came all this way. And here I figured it was just to visit with friends, Martin quipped. If only I had time for that. But I did actually come to see you, I smiled at Martin. He groaned. Now what scheme are you planning? It didn't take as much convincing as I thought to talk Martin and Fiona into joining me in St. June. I had tried to talk the Marshal in as well, but he turned me down, saying he was fine here and didn't want to be involved in politics anymore. I couldn't argue with the man. I didn't want to be involved either, which is why I recruited Martin to do it for me. Chapter 158, Nascent Republic. Not much changed in the month after bringing Martin and Fiona back to St. June, at least for me. Martin had managed to make a name for himself across the town, and as I expected, he was well liked. Elections hadn't been held yet and nobody wanted to go the route of declaring that they were now the new city lord. The new barge was completed and I trained an older gentleman that used to be a train conductor to operate it. His level was a bit on the low side, so it required that I pair him up with an assistant that could help charge the Mana Hearts. It was probably a good idea to have 2 people anyway in case something happened. I would have to find someone to help Maria as well when she returned. Not that she needed it, but I knew that being alone and dwelling on your darker thoughts was not a healthy way to live. Ska had joined the town guard along with Fiona. Although, I did take Fiona out with me to try and level her up. Ska had finally tipped over into level 20. I was a bit surprised at the second class he had chosen. Ska Grimalkin Hunter/Warden 20 halves. At first, I thought it was a forest-related class, but it turned out to be more a defender-type class. It did give him a pretty good skill that slowly boosted his endurance the more he suffered while protecting others. Considering the Grimalkin's major disadvantage of only getting a free skill slot every 5 levels, Ska would never become like Tatiana or Hagar. They were able to take full advantage of their class and all the skills provided. It felt like a real shit move by the system, but Ska didn't seem to care. He liked simple. As for my month, I watched the shield towers go up and I topped them off with the runic emitters. I also took it upon myself to make the ground below the city safe. There would be no repeat of what happened in Houston, happening in St. June. Compressing the ground or enchanting it was simply out of the question in the short term, as there was too much area to cover. But I already had sensors. I just had to adjust what they could sense. I still made an effort to place hidden runes that made the ground more durable. I also didn't want to have to monitor the sensors all the time, so I built all of the control and interface systems into the central tower in a backup that only Martin and I knew about. Assuming he won the election, he could notify Kurt. I felt a bit bad about not notifying Kurt, but the less I had to interact with the man, the better. I didn't think he would purposely divulge this information, but I couldn't be sure he wouldn't talk outside of the protections I had in place in my warehouse. For now, it needed to remain a secret. That went doubly for what I was currently working on. Spread across multiple benches was one of my new projects. Despite what that Stygian Order agent had said, they were an enemy and I was done playing defensive. The pieces of the device in front of me had been the most complicated runic work I had built to date. Far outstripping the fortress, my hand, or even my armor. The main section was a flat disc with mithril inlay that ran around in simple concentric circles. 4 curved struts were positioned on the benches and these contained the bulk of the rune work. Nothing was active yet, as I had one piece yet to create. This wasn't a typical teleportation pad. Once active, it would lock onto an outbound teleport and allow the user standing inside the disk to piggyback on their location. I had tried making it larger, but I didn't have enough available mithril and mana hearts to power a larger unit. So at most one person could go. Or in my case, Fiona and I, when I got around to telling her my plan. While the Enchanters Guild might become the biggest thorn in my side, I wasn't yet at war with them. That didn't hold true for the Stygian Order and their meddling and attempts to kill or get rid of me and my friends. They needed to pay for their actions, even if I couldn't destroy all of them. Lord Vic T stepped out of the portal of the bazaar and into the dusty town of Houston. Traveling by portal across the same planet was cheaper than crossing into a new world, but the convenience alone was worth the cost. His retainers glanced around at the men sent to greet them and gave disapproving looks. Lord Vic T kept silent, reading the possibilities of conversation based on his most prized possession. He loved to unsettle people by mimicking a mind reader. It wasn't the case, but his highly enchanted robe came close to allowing it. The reason for his visit to this god-forsaken hellhole of a town that smelled of shit, piss, and unwashed bodies was for one simple reason: information. The man that called himself the mayor had reached out to another representative of the guild and had come to an agreement. Lord Vic T assumed it was a standard agreement. Only authorized members of the guild were allowed to sell magical gear or enchanted items within the area of control. All non-guild members were forced to join and pay their dues or be barred from sales. Usually, this was enough to discourage most people. The few that attempted to circumvent this law were dealt with very harshly. Killing someone was the last resort, as losing a talented enchanter was a great loss. The local guild representative bowed deeply. Lord Vic T, had I been given more notice of your arrival, we could have prepared an acceptable reception for one such as yourself. If I had wanted you to know I was arriving, I would have informed you. I am here based on disturbing rumors. The man audibly gulped, knowing that if these rumors were true, it meant he was doing a poor job of curtailing non-sanctioned enchanting. I can assure you, Lord Vic T, that we are taking the rumors very seriously. I have yet to find any indication that they are true, however. I have learned that the man in question, along with his friends, have all fled the town, prior to our dealings with the mayor, Mr. Rosewill. Lord Vic T finished for the man, making him pale even further under his scrutinizing gaze. Well, don't make me stand here all day, take me to this man. At once, Lord Victi, please, follow me, the man sputtered out, bowing a few times before he turned to lead the way. Fiona, I yelled, waving to the woman as I jogged toward her. She stopped and turned. When she spotted me she waved back and waited for me to catch up. What brings you out of your cave? She asked with a hint of amusement. I just rolled my eyes. You know how it gets, too much to do, not enough time to do it. How are Martin and Ska doing? They are settling in fine. You know Martin, he already has big plans on how to improve the city, even though he isn't mayor yet. Ska is doing good as well, he is keeping busy hunting the elementals and keeping the peace. While St. June isn't as crowded as Houston was, there have been some scuffles. Well, I'm sure he can handle himself. And who knows, someday St. June will eclipse what now remains of Houston. The plateau is far larger than the walled-off section of Houston. I don't see why it couldn't grow to be a massive city. She nodded thoughtfully. It does remind me a lot of my hometown back in the Asheran Kingdom. Although, that town was only situated along a river. Does it make you miss home? I asked. Sometimes I get a pang of homesickness. I miss my parents and still haven't gathered the courage to send them a missive. But in all honesty, peasants or simple folk are treated far better here than they ever were back in my world. It still surprises me sometimes. I'm sure there are some places on Earth that make your world seem like a dream in comparison. Not every country here was as open and tolerant, not that we didn't have our issues, because we did. But I like to think most people were okay. Such a stunning endorsement, she replied drolly. I chuckled. I actually came to ask you something. Oh. I can't really talk about it here. When you get some time, come to the warehouse. I can come tonight, should I gather the others? No, this is really something only you can do. She nodded, fair enough, I will see you then. So, what's so important you can only talk about it in here? Fiona asked, gesturing to the walls of the warehouse. It's about the Stygian order and my plan to finally get them off our backs. Oh, well, I can see the need for secrecy then. Do tell. Well, first we need to locate their spies within the city. I have a rough guess that there are around 6 currently within the city. Really? How do you know? I haven't told anyone this, so don't go spreading it around. I came up with a way to track incoming portals. With that information, I was able to determine how many people came and went through the portals. Really? She asked in surprise. That's a major advantage then. I nodded. I have been keeping track of their comings and goings for about 2 months now. They mainly follow me around, but they always leave a few within the city. The problem is, while I can tell where the portals appear, I can't get there before the spies vanish into the population. What I need from you, is to get eyes on the spies and a good description of each so I can track them with Reaper. Okay, but won't they just portal out as soon as you confront them? Yup, that's where the second part of the mission comes in. Once we know about all the spies, we get the city guard in place to capture them. Of course, they will run as soon as they know they are compromised. That's where this lovely device comes in. I gestured to the items spread across the tables. Fiona glanced at the items in doubt. And what monstrosity have you built this time? I only create items of wonder, I replied with feigned indignation. This mess of components will create a one-man teleportation platform, capable of locking on and following an outbound teleport. That will, she said, picking up the thin pad and examining it. It doesn't look like much, but I suppose the runes are hidden. I nodded. Well, in theory, that's what it will do, not like I can test it beforehand. She set the item back on the table. I suppose you're going to do something risky and life-threatening by using it yourself then. I tried making it larger, but the cost was too prohibitive. But, you should be able to teleport along with me if you hide inside my body. She snorted, as fun as that sounds, won't my presence harm you? I held out my hand, give it a try. She shook her head ruefully before passing her ghostly hand through my arm. It felt like being dunked in a tank of cold water and I shivered, but it wasn't nearly as achingly cold as she used to feel. The feeling passed as she retracted her arm. You okay? She asked. I nodded, yeah, feels like a dip in an icy pool, but I can survive, the damage was minimal. We can practice some more, and once we are ready we can time it so you only have to remain inside for a short period of time. She didn't look entirely convinced, but she eventually agreed to help me with my plan and keep quiet on the items I created. Chapter 159, Cleaning House. Fiona and I spent a week practicing and got to a point where I could endure her whole form within me for a minute. I really hoped that was enough time. She had been busy as well, managing to identify 4 of the spies. The other 2 were much better at remaining hidden. I wanted to catch all 6 but I didn't think we had the time. Martin had received a message from the Marshal, informing him that a Lord Victi had paid a personal visit to Houston. It only helped confirm that Houston had allied itself with the Enchanters Guild. I knew it would only be a matter of time if he hadn't already until Rosewell told the Lord about me. With that came 2 possibilities that I could see. One, they would try and tie me to their organization, or they would try and get rid of me. I had heard plenty of stories in the bazaar about how the guild conducted business and had no doubt they would do the same to me. That had been my driving force for erecting the wall and the force field. But that was also not an immediate concern. Rosewell, the slimy asshat that he was, didn't know my current location. Even when they did figure it out, we were a hard target to hit. The mountains on the west cut off any attack from that side. The ocean to the south made an attack unlikely due to the ocean monsters and the fact that Lord Victi would have to cross the large desert to even get to the ocean. That left an overland attack from either the north or east. The north was dominated by the elementals, and while not unbeatable, they continuously responded. That left the east as the only real approach by land. And we had the steep plateau to discourage most attackers. It was always a possibility that the guild had flying ships, making all my assumptions useless, but even then we had the shield that covered the entire city. But this was all only future possibilities. Before war broke out between me and the guild, I wanted to rid the area of any of the Stygian Order spies. I had ideas for dealing with the guild, but in order to implement them, I needed free rein to move about unmolested. The radio crackled to life with 2 clicks before going silent. I breathed in and summoned my helmet from my ring. "You ready for this?" I asked Fiona. "Like I have a choice, can't let you go off by yourself and die like a fool." "Thanks for the vote of confidence," I grumbled. "You're welcome," she smiled back, getting as close to me as she could. She would only have a few seconds to enter my body before the now floating poles would begin to spin and the teleport activated. I clutched Dominion and Destruction in my main hand and a fist-sized orb of Mithril and runes in my other hand. It was another new invention, required to enact my vengeance on the Stygian Order. I gave her a nod and she clicked the button on the radio. "Go." She threw the radio off to the side and I felt the cold of death soak into my body as her form merged inside my own. Now we had to wait and hope the spies fell for my trap. Oslo watched wearily from his position. He had been on edge all week, some sense telling him that something was off, but he couldn't place a finger on what. He didn't think he had been spotted. His job wasn't to keep an eye on Fuller, so he blended it much easier with the populace than some of the others. He was currently dressed as an older Hispanic woman that tended a small fruit cart. Hidden by his headscarf was a small radio transceiver that he used to keep tabs on the local forces. Since they had gone back to using old 2-way radios, it was easy to intercept their communications. When Oslo heard the 2 clicks, he froze for a second, glancing around. Then less than a minute later he heard the single-word reply and a group of city guards rushed out from around a distant building and forced their way inside. He knew one of his accomplices was within that building and muttered a silent curse. The people milling through the market all turned toward the commotion. Oslo cursed, knowing that Edgar was on the 3rd floor and was a primary lookout for keeping tabs on Fuller. He almost breathed a sigh of relief though, not seeing any soldiers coming toward him before his 6th sense warned him of danger. He tried to throw himself to the side but was tackled to the ground by a humanoid cat. Oslo knew the jig was up and activated his escape ability, blurring out and reappearing 10 feet away as he began to run. "Douglas, I'm burned, get me out!" Oslo yelled as he was forced to activate another skill to avoid the persistent Grimalkin. A moment later he ran through an open portal, watching it flare out behind him, cutting his pursuer off. Oslo spotted 4 of the other scouts that had been in St. June. So either the last one had been captured, died, or was able to avoid detection. "What happened?" Stone asked, hurrying toward the arrival chamber. Oslo watched him skid to a halt though as a popping noise sounded behind him. Oslo turned to see a man dressed for war with a staff tucked in the crook of his arm. He held a strange orb between his hands that he twisted and dropped to the floor with a clank. Oslo had no time to process the orb as a second figure materialized out of the first, not that he already didn't know who the first one was. "Fuck me." My own take on the teleportation scrambler dropped to the floor and vanished from view. My surprise at seeing Stone standing there gaping at me had allowed the person to flash through another portal before my item activated. I didn't think it was Stone though, I was pretty sure it was the strange man that confronted me in Vegas. But I couldn't be entirely sure. It mattered little as I blurred toward my first target. The older woman tossed her dress at me, but I sliced the dragon head of my staff through it, burning it to ash only to reveal a man wearing the mask of an old woman and now carrying two wickedly curved daggers in his hands. The man tried to back away while deflecting my blows, but I alternated between the lion and the dragon head. It didn't seem he could keep up as one blow crashed through his defense and shattered his arm. He whipped his other dagger at me and I let it impact my armor. The weapon had been magical as I felt a slight sting as it cut through my armor. Sure enough, when I looked, I spotted poison. It was nothing special and I quickly cleansed it as I gave chase. I heard some of the other order members yell about my sphere and even saw some spells splash in the general area it had fallen, but I smirked in triumph. The sphere had inbuilt levitators and it would continue to move about the room, avoiding obstacles until it ran out of juice. With Fiona keeping the remaining people in the room occupied, it would be impossible for them to locate the item in time. I had to give the man I was chasing credit, he was as slippery as an eel. But as someone who had fought Ska on more than one occasion, I quickly figured out the man's tactics and managed to land a devastating blow with the lion's head. The man's back snapped as he was sent hurtling against a wall. I could hear shouts coming from further down the corridor. I had chased the man down, but I ran back to help Fiona finish off the others first. By the time I had returned to the initial room, she had cut down two of the men with Randy Cotton's old sword. That only left a woman with a bow and one other man that wielded a glaive. I dodged a crackling arrow as I ran into the room, quickly deciding that the archer was my new target. It was another chase as the archer faded into the shadows. I clicked my tongue in irritation, noting that I would have to modify the scrambler a bit to affect powers like this. Her maneuver forced me to activate my tattoo to locate her. Another bonus of my helmet, it blocked the light of my tattoo but didn't stop the effect. I spotted the woman emerging from another shadow behind Fiona. I fired off an overcharged annihilator sphere at the woman before she could fire her arrow. She gaped in surprise, her arrow going wide as her body disintegrated from her pelvis out. The final man wasn't nearly as fleet of foot and Fiona fought him into a corner before she avoided a clumsy strike of his larger weapon. She stepped inside his guard and thrust the sword through the man's breast, skewering him to the wall behind him. I heard a grunt of pain followed by a raspy exhale as the man slumped against her blade. Already I could hear feet pounding down the hall and I activated my monocannon in my hand and charged energy lance with my other. Both spells went off, flashing down the tunnel. Screams were quickly cut off by a loud boom as the spells detonated. A wave of dirt and debris inundated the room we were in only a second later. But that was fine, it did not affect either Fiona in her incorporeal state or me with my helmet on. We moved through the complex and killed anyone left alive. The place was weird. There were rooms for sleeping, some rooms were labs or workshops of some sort with items of all types scattered about. The way some of the people tried to defend the items showed that some held value. The strangest room was the last. It looked like the inside of a massive geode, only the crystals along the walls were pitch black, with a wide crystal sticking up in the center of the room with a slanted top that faced the entry. You could see where the walls had been broken away to get into the room, so it was clear this was not something the Stygian order had created. I heard Fiona gasp as she entered the chamber. Oh my gods, it's a node. Mr. Nobody appeared in the middle of nowhere, still wearing the disguise of stone. A few others appeared moments later, but then there was nothing. He let out a low exasperated chuckle. He had warned the order not to underestimate Paul Fuller. Yet he hadn't expected the man to move so quickly. It was a lesson he wouldn't forget. The node was lost, but that was fine. Mr. Fuller wouldn't destroy it like the Black Dragon had attempted to do. Douglas, Stone's cell is compromised, initiating full burn procedure. Give me 5 minutes and relocate me to another dead zone to await quarantine. He didn't wait for a reply before he began cutting down the confused survivors. Some tried to flee, but he wasn't nicknamed the Hunter for nothing. There was the obligatory screaming and the cursing him out, but they knew what they had signed up for. Sometimes cleansing entire cells was necessary for the survival of the organization. Mr. Nobody knew he had chosen correctly when a new portal appeared exactly 5 minutes later. He changed his form back to a nondescript man in a well-tailored black suit and adjusted his tie before stepping through the new portal. Chapter 160, Free of Interference. Fiona and I examined the obsidian-colored pedestal in the center of the room. As we neared it, glowing characters emerged along the top. They were not in any language I was familiar with and the system didn't translate them for me. I looked over to Fiona and she shook her head. Well, guess there wasn't much we could do with this. So, I know what a node is, but why is it such a big deal? I asked. The sound of my voice seemed to get sucked up by the room, so it only came out as barely above a whisper. Fiona motioned to back out of the room and I followed. That was weird, I stated as I crossed out of the room. My voice had returned to a normal volume. Yeah, she said, eyeing the room with an odd look upon her face. I only know a bit about node chambers. I haven't ever seen one though. Most of what I know is only rumors spread across centuries, so I can't say for certain any of it is accurate. Fair enough, I would like to know anyway. Well, most people believe a node chamber allows people to switch classes without losing their levels. I'm pretty sure that is not true. If it were, the royalty would have done it just because they could and to flout their status. Another rumor says it allows the node holder to communicate across the planets with anyone else that holds a node. Well, I can certainly see that being useful. What else? Teleportation to any bizarre location, she added. Really? I replied, eyeing the chamber with a bit more envy. Wait, if that were true, why didn't they all just flee that way? Fiona shrugged. As I said, these are all just rumors. It could be that they are all true or all just lies. I can only say for certain that the writing on the pedestal is an originator language. Originators. Well, the system didn't just spring into existence. Nobody knows who truly made it, but it was likely one of the first 3 species to be inducted, perhaps all 3. But they don't allow outsiders to their worlds and rarely if ever mix with other species. That doesn't help us with our current situation. How valuable is this place? Again she shrugged. Considering they were state secrets, I would assume highly valuable. But only if you can figure out how to use it. I glanced once again at the dark and forbidding-looking room. We can't hold it. If it's that precious, they will come back for it. No, best to deny them access. Come on, let's take anything of value and meet back in that first chamber. Fiona agreed with my assessment and we split up to take anything that survived our assault. It was easy enough to figure out how the Stygian Order, or whoever found the node and got to it. A concrete-lined bore tunnel was in the ceiling of one of the chambers. Nobody was going to be coming down that anymore. It had been sealed off by at least a few hundred feet of concrete. It was rather newer than the concrete that made up the floors, and I guessed it had been poured after the world switched over. The chamber itself had been excavated. You could see remnants of the blast holes used to carve away rock from the walls. There were a total of 20 chambers ranging in size from a few hundred square feet to a couple thousand. While the main entrance had been blocked off, they had left the air circulation systems intact. My first surprise came when I entered what looked like a lab. The body of the man that tried defending it against us lay in a broken heap along one wall. I walked over to pick up the weapon he had been wielding at the time. When I turned it over, I got an unwelcome view. The blade had rough runes, not enchantments, carved into it. I couldn't yet tell what the runes did as I didn't recognize any of them. I found this odd and slightly unnerving. The work was sloppy though. It didn't even incorporate the geometric designs needed to break the patterns up. I found out why as I continued my search of the room and came across one of my early designs. It was one of the stamps I had used to free myself from slavery. It was in rough shape and they had done something to damage the runic structure that hid its intended purpose. Still, if this is what they worked off of, it was concerning. While I knew my knowledge of runes and how to incorporate them into items wouldn't remain secret forever, I had hoped for at least a few years of keeping it from other sources. It seemed like that was a pipe dream now. I did not doubt that the Stygian Order had other sites full of researchers working to unravel the secrets. I stuffed everything of value into my ring. Then I gave the room one last look before I placed another device I had created for this mission on the table. Not knowing what I was getting into, I had prepared a dozen different contingencies to deal with the aftermath. I was glad that it was an underground facility. It made it much easier to employ this one. Fiona and I continued to clear the facility and I placed a device in each room, as well as one just outside the node chamber. I didn't want some weirdness, from inside the room, to affect the device. That's everything, Fiona said, giving the main chamber one last look. Not quite, I said, looking around before I jumped and snatched a floating invisible ball out of the air. I twisted it to deactivate the device and stuffed it in my ring. There, now we can go, I added with a smile. She just shook her head and stepped onto the thin white platform that was a match for the one back in my warehouse. I braved the chill as I activated the platform. There was a flash of light followed by a hissing bubble as the small white disc dissolved, leaving the hidden facility silent. A soft click echoed through the abandoned facility 20 minutes later, followed by more as the place filled up with a haze. After a while silence returned, the objects placed throughout the facility had stopped spraying their vapor. There was a final click as a surge of icy mana shot out from all of the devices, freezing the droplets and causing them to form massive chunks of ice, encasing the entire facility. "Whew, glad that return pad worked," I stated, hopping off the pad and avoiding an irritated slap from Fiona. "You didn't know if it was going to work? How did you expect to get back here then?" I shrugged. "I would have figured something out. Besides, it worked out and you even managed to get to level 19. She glared at me for a bit before walking off and muttering, "Ugh, men." I just smiled. It was a good day. I had dealt proactively with an issue that had been plaguing me for months and my friend had leveled. I assumed with this level her ability to remain in her human form would expand. I could ask her about it later. For now, I needed to go over my gains. I had used Sunder skill to try and get one of the abilities that made these people so hard to catch. Be that turning into smoke or flitting through shadows. When I looked through the 5 skills I grabbed, my face fell in disappointment. They were all garbage. I hadn't been able to try any more times as that had taken up the remaining open skill slots I had. I sighed, using Void Lottery on a pair to see if I got something worthwhile. Forest Stride, instant movement to another tree within sight. Must be touching a tree to trigger. Cost 100 mana, cooldown 1 hour. The skill seemed tailored to a druid-type class. It wasn't exactly what I had in mind when I thought of a movement skill, but it would still work. I was also either lucky to get it or the void could somehow tell my intent. That was a scary thought in and of itself, and I decided not to dwell on that too much. That left me with only one open slot for future abilities. I decided to try something I hadn't thought to do since it wasn't necessary until now. I used multicast on Void Lottery and sure enough, I was able to dump 2 more skills. Pearlescent Vortex, create a glittering vortex around a target, that confuses senses and renders them trapped in an illusion. The effect of the spells is based on your intelligence score and will fail to take hold if the target has a higher perception. Lasts 20 SEC or until disrupted. Cost 200 mana, cooldown 20 minutes. That was an interesting spell if a bit on the expensive side. Still, having the ability to lock down a creature for 20 seconds was no small feat. I would have to see what the spell considered disruption before seeing how useful it was. I mulled over one final thing before I went to speak with Martin and Kurt. I knew my main class was going to take ages to level past 20. But it had felt like I was throwing experience down an endless well before I had finally leveled to 21. Seeing as I was also running out of free space to acquire new and powerful abilities, I decided to switch my experience back over to my second class. There were a few more skills I may decide to dump, but that was going to run out quickly. If I got my second class to 20, I could finally upgrade strength, endurance, and agility into the second tier. Having 4 stats in that tier would give me quite the leg up. Which was something I was going to need considering I wasn't a specialized build like some of the arena competitors. I still thought I would have a fair chance of beating any of them if I had gone all out, but who wanted a fair chance when you could go for overwhelming? With my decision made, I left my warehouse and made my way to speak with Martin and Kurt. St. June was becoming quite lively since I had arrived here. Some of the displaced people in Houston had made their way over by barge. That was stopped though, with it now clear that the Enchanters Guild was backing Edward Rosewill. We just got rid of one set of spies, I didn't need to deal with another group so soon. Though I doubted we had gotten them all, or even prevented some of Rosewill's own from making their way over, those would be dealt with soon. I needed the town to be as secure as possible so I could finally leave and level. More and more people were catching up with me and it was a bit irksome. This had been the whole reason I had not wanted to get bogged down with politics and running a city. I knew I would eventually get out-leveled and some asshat would come along and challenge my position. That landmass with the Gorliphants would be my first stop. Past that I wasn't sure yet. The rift near Ska's old village would be a fantastic place to level if the creatures there weren't 2 times my level. No, I would have to wait to go back there. I doubted my poisoned meat trick would work a second time. There was one last thing I needed to do for the city, but they would have to come up with the resources. I wasn't about to go running around the country to dig up more mithril and mana hearts to create mana cannons for the city walls. But I had already spoken with Kurt about this and his people were doing a valiant job stockpiling the necessary items, despite the man being such a disagreeable asshat.